What surprised you about the depth of the bench in Canada with respect to AI and building companies?
One of the things I've learned in the last 6 months traveling around the country is even our investors don't know where to invest here. And then when they find it, they are shocked about what they see. They say, geez, we've gone all over the world, and they find CoLab. And then CoLab will say something like, this is crazy because, and I hear this story a lot, 95% of my contracts are outside of Canada. Why? Because Canadian companies aren't investing in us. So we've got to tell our story. This happens with Geotab, with CoLab, with Ada, with Coveo. I could name dozens of big companies who have blue chip partners around the world, and their hardest market to crack is Canada. What AI has brought is the new age of the entrepreneur, and it's tapping into a deep-seated Canadian value, which is the ability to create and grow in places that you might not think. This is the age of the entrepreneur, and this is a perfect moment for the low-hanging fruit called Canada.
Welcome to the Darby Mills series, Intrepid Pioneers of the Next Economy, featuring discussions with entrepreneurs at the forefront of deploying machine intelligence and brainstorming sessions about where the technology may go at the limit.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Darby Mills series, Intrepid Pioneers of the Next Economy. I'm Ajay Agrawal, co-founder of Intrepid Growth Partners, and today I'm delighted to welcome guests and viewers to a special episode. This one features a special conversation that includes Canada's AI Minister, Evan Solomon, my colleague, Intrepid co-founder, Mark Shulgan, and CoLab CEO and co-founder, Adam Keating, who is also a member of the minister's newly formed AI task force. Let's start the show. Adam, we'll kick off with you. Delighted to have you on the show. First off, congratulations on all the success of CoLab. And if you could describe for our listeners, what is CoLab, what's the product, and how to use AI in the product?
So CoLab itself is an AI-powered operating system for engineering teams. Think people building cars, planes, medical devices. Building one of those products today is a very manual effort. If you were looking at a vehicle, for example, you'd have thousands of engineers, hundreds of suppliers sprinkled all over the world, communicating for the most part through emails to make decisions, or Microsoft Teams, or spreadsheets and PowerPoints that are really slow and blocking the rate at which they can make technical decisions. CoLab's whole goal is to help make that process much easier so you can make a technical decision in a fraction of the time. The core product itself is really a design review tool, allowing humans to work with other humans throughout the company, their supply chain, to make these trade-offs and decisions. And now our AI product, Auto Review, layers into that like an AI peer checker. So when you think about design review, picture a vehicle. You're going to have thousands of components. Each one of those has a 3D model, a drawing, and a whole bunch of other technical data that needs to be shared with anywhere from 1 to a dozen different groups to give their feedback on the design. They're looking for, does it meet the safety requirements? Is it a high quality design? Does it meet the cost? So what engineers do today is they take pictures, put them in PowerPoint decks, mark them up, send them around, and then wait for feedback. What CoLab does is allows them to send directly the 3D model to anyone, anywhere securely, get that feedback right in context of the model. So imagine putting like a 3D pin on a piece of a vehicle, and then be able to communicate with a supplier who might be 12 hours behind you time zone wise. And then CoLab takes care of all the background work. So there's no administration. We help you just focus on giving feedback and solving problems.
Excellent. So you have engineers that are working in Ontario and in British Columbia and in Seoul, Korea, and everybody's working on some part of the same thing. And they're able to add their comments and review specifications with each other. And you've created a software platform for them to be able to collaborate in this process. And then you introduce AI. What's the role of AI?
So if you think about our core product, think of that as like a human review tool. It's me connecting with you folks to make a technical decision. Our AI product is really doing the same thing, but leveraging AI. So we call it an AI peer checker. Imagine putting a drawing into CoLab. And instead of tagging Mark to do the review, the AI peer checker looks at a checklist of your requirements and actually will redline the file for you. It will point out the deficiencies based on your team's guidelines and standards, and then give you a first pass. The whole goal of this is so that when you evolve a design, you basically get instantaneous feedback. The more you do this, the more human review you do, the smarter it's going to get. And that's really just like the first foundational AI capability and what we're building towards a full operating system that'll be an AI agent that can help you take from point A to point B in any part of the product development process.
And for all our American listeners and people around the world who say, okay, this company is out in St. John's, Newfoundland, we have no idea, where that is. Are they just doing this for the local designers and engineers in St. John's? Who are your customers?
So CoLab's headquartered in the most easterly tip of North America. We're on an island, and it might seem like we're a small little company, but we work with the biggest manufacturing enterprise on the planet. So you're thinking companies like Ford, Lockheed Martin, GE, Johnson Controls, and many others I can't name. Where we really specialize is in complexity. So the bigger and more complex the org, the product, the supply chain, the harder it is to make decisions. And that's really where we shine in helping teams.
Okay. And then lastly, before we bring in the minister, you're based in St. John's, Newfoundland. Can you describe, when many people think about AI in Canada, think about Toronto, Montreal, many people would never have heard of St. John's outside of Canada. What are the benefits and the challenges of building a business that is competing globally, selling to companies like the ones you described, Ford and Lockheed Martin and so on, and being based there?
St. John's is a really unique place to build a company like CoLab. I mean, being honest with you, the most beneficial piece is just like how much people care. People are very loyal here, and they care a lot about what they do. So like people on our team, we've got people who've been here 6, 7, 8 years. And in the tech world, you don't see a whole lot of that, not that kind of loyalty. And I think that level of ambition and commitment is really, really exciting. And what's nice about St. John's is small enough that the community also cares a lot about you. So when we think about building this team, we've got an incredible relationship with the university here. I think out of our 160 employees, 25 are once interns. And we've been able to attract incredible people with us. So as much as we're headquartered here, I think of that as like an infusion into the culture of the company internally and then with our customers. But we act like a global company. We sell globally. We have the ambition of, the biggest startups down in the valley, but a little infusion of what's special here in St. John's.
Wonderful. All right. Well, let me now invite in the minister to weigh in here. Minister Solomon, you've been in your new role for less than half a year, but you've already traversed a significant part of the country. And for people whose mental model is AI is Toronto and Montreal, what surprised you about the depth of the bench in Canada with respect to AI and building companies?
Well, thanks, Ajay. Let me just first say, hey, just so folks realize, Ajay and I have been talking a lot over the last 6 months, and I really just want to thank you for being on the task force, the 30-day Sprint AI task force. A little worried that you're on a podcast and not working on the task force, because it's only 30 days. We've got such a short. No, but I will say it's just incredible, your view. And Mark, we've met before, and does incredible work doing what we want to do, supporting our ecosystem by investing and believing in startups. And let me just say something to Adam at CoLab, which is fantastic work. Ajay talked about folks not knowing St. John's, and I can tell you, if you don't know St. John's, it's like living your life without ever trying pizza. Like, it is something you will love, and you will love it cold. You will love it hot. You will love it in many forms. The people, the place, everything about it is fantastic. I've always wanted to start a podcast or a TV show where you drop two strangers off in St. John's, and the winning person is who gets invited to dinner first. The show would be like 5 minutes. Yeah, no, but the truth is, it's not that matters, by the way. People stay there because it's a fantastic place. So people should know it and will know it. And like many places in Canada, what they don't maybe recognize as much, and this is not true of the world, it's true of Canada, is that innovation comes out of the rock in ways that people don't know. And look, communities create innovation. St. John's is a fantastic community, but you see it in Saskatchewan, and you see it in Alberta, and you see it in Ontario and Quebec and BC, and you see it in the North. And I've spent a lot of time in the North. One thing we should say is Canada's got 3 factors that are foundational to innovation. One, a fantastic education system, and that's available to all. And you cannot have a successful country that can capitalize on innovation unless you invest in the education system. That starts at the beginning and goes right up to what Ajay does at the universities. And we need that. We've got that, but we have to keep investing in that. Two, you have to have a skilled workforce and a workforce that uses that education to embrace change. I'm just going to go to St. John's because Adam's here. Look, this is a province that has embraced change for good and for lots of reasons. Scarcity creates innovation, and Newfoundland and Labrador have had to face moments of great abundance and moments of great scarcity with the cod stocks. And I have many, many friends. I've been out there many, many times. My wife works out there a lot. My wife is part of an organization that takes kids on just so non-Canadians recognize something called Students on Ice, where they go to St. John's and they have an icebreaker there, and then they go around, take kids on scholarships to the Arctic for science and reconciliation, and they have learning experiences. Much of it, by the way, Newfoundland and Labrador, some of the most beautiful parts of our country, then right through around the Arctic, where I've been many times. But so you need that education, and then you need risk takers like Mark, who believe in the country. One of the things, Ajay, that I realize is not just that there's innovation everywhere, and there is around our universities. We talk about Waterloo. Look, Waterloo, what's happening in Waterloo and the ecosystem around Waterloo, around Toronto, around Montreal, around Alberta. I was just in the University of Alberta, around Amy, in Vancouver. But all over the world, the country, is our university in St. John's, by the way, where they have a phenomenal university, and they're spitting out not just engineers but students of all type who are starting companies. And this is the thing that Canada does poorly, and we should recognize it. We don't tell our story. The truth is, if we told our story the way Silicon Valley tells their story, we have all sorts of little Silicon Valley sparking up. I think Ajay's done a great job and Mark's done a great job spending their lives investigating and helping grow that. And we should tell that story, because when we don't tell the story, innovation that's hidden under a bushel never becomes scalable. And unless we scale it, investors want to find it. One of the things I've learned in the last 6 months traveling around the country is even our investors don't know where to invest here. And then when they find it, they are shocked about what they see. Companies that are procuring contracts, they say, geez, we've gone all over the world, and they find CoLab. And then CoLab will say something like, this is crazy because, and I hear this story a lot, 95% of my contracts are outside of Canada. Why? Because Canadian companies aren't investing in us. And then they find out about them, and then they say, well, of course we'll invest in you. We just didn't know you existed. So we've got to tell our story. This happens with Geotab, with CoLab, with Ada, with Coveo. I could name dozens of big companies who have blue chip partners around the world, and their hardest market to crack is Canada. I have companies that are getting VC investment from around the world. The hardest market to crack is Canada. And I think that's changing. So let me just say one more thing, Ajay. That's changing because we're telling our story. You're doing it on podcasts like this, on places like like our Scale AI, our All-In events, Tech Week in Toronto. The second thing is Canada was started as a country of entrepreneurs. You do not come to this landscape. You do not land in St. John's and say, we will stay here and build here unless you're an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs look at the weather and they mentally already have boots, rain gear. They know how to survive the long winter of early innovation. And so entrepreneurs are by nature creative and resilient. And what AI has brought is the new age of the entrepreneur. And it's tapping into a deep-seated Canadian value, which is the ability to create and grow in places that you might not think, and then to welcome people who have taken risks from around the world and come to these shores and who have stories of risk. And they said, I've taken a risk to come here, and they want this dream, this promise, and then they make it. And AI has given them the tools. And I keep saying, this is the age of the entrepreneur. And this is a perfect moment for the low-hanging fruit called Canada. So I really recognized that in the first 6 months. And Adam is a absolutely classic example.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thanks for that, Minister. And when I met you, the first time that we met after Prime Minister Carney had appointed you in your role as Minister of AI, I asked about what's your objective, and the first word that you said was scale. And on the call with us is, in my view, the person who has done more scaling in terms of investing in scale than anyone else in the nation. He built the growth equity investment team at CPPIB, which for everyone outside of Canada is one of the largest pools of capital in the world, and one of the top 10 in the world. And then he did the same thing again at another large Canadian fund called OMERS. And so Mark Shulgan is for a quarter century being focused on nothing but scaling companies. And so, Mark, you've seen all this stuff for so long, and you led Intrepid's investment into CoLab. And so, given all the things you've seen, what inspired you so much about Adam, about CoLab, and then in the process of visiting St. John's, you came back and started singing the praise of St. John's and what the community there has built. Can you give us just your overall description of Adam, CoLab, and St. John's?
Yeah, for sure. And first, let me start off by saying thank you to Minister Solomon, because I think while I've been doing this for 25 years, you just totally nailed it in terms of the important characteristics to build an ecosystem. And as Ajay points out, the benefit of leading CPP's growth equity team is we had a global lens. We were investing across Asia, across North America, and across Europe, and it gave us this incredible perspective. And when I first heard about CoLab and Adam and his team, and I heard the statistics, we break everything down into these software characteristics to get a sense for how companies are performing. And one of the earlier investors told me about what was going on in St. John's. And I kind of couldn't believe it, because the metrics were so good. And growth rates, the retention of customers, the evolution of the product. And so I got out on a plane and I went out to go and visit Adam. We had a lovely dinner in the early part of this year, which was well ahead of when their financing was going to occur. And I think what I got out of that dinner, and I think this is the one element that maybe Minister Solomon, you didn't touch on, which is the importance of trust in relationships. And what I have seen historically throughout some of the markets that I've been in is that you've had something called investor tourism, which is in the hottest markets, you'll have people coming in from other geographies and making a bet here or there. And I think one of the important things that we have here is a trusted ecosystem. I knew Adam through a number of other investors that I trust and rely upon their judgment. And that gave me the confidence to hop on the 4.5-hour flight and get out to St. John's. And then, what I was, Adam told me about 3 or 4 other companies. Within a day, I went out and met those companies as well. So it just gives you a sense for what the ecosystem and the richness is like. But, we've now completed our work on our investment in CoLab. And I think what really stuck out to me, I've made more than 30 investments throughout my career in some of the best companies throughout North America and Asia. And Adam's team is rock stars. And it's not just Adam. It's not just Jeremy or Taylor. It is the finance function. It is the legal function. It is the go-to-market function. And it was just across the board that we saw this really strong talent. And then the early investors, people like Mark Dobbin at Killick Capital, the founders of Verifin. It creates this really rich ecosystem where you've got the talent and the experience for companies and entrepreneurs that have been able to scale on a global basis, bringing that to the company and bringing that to Adam and his team, and just being all in terms of their level of support. Memorial University and just the richness of the engineering school there. And then, Bannerman's, which is a local coffee shop / brewery, where you walk into it and it's like startup garage, but every table is full and everybody knows one another and everybody is there to help one another out. It wasn't just Adam that was introducing me to other founders, but it was like this mesh network of like, oh, have you heard about, oh, let me introduce you to, and for a town of 250,000 people, I've never seen anything like it. So
let me just mention one thing there, pull at one thread, which is, Mark, you said Minister Solomon didn't mention trust. In some senses, I feel like one of his primary themes overall has been trust. He has really pushed on the trust point in terms of, in order to adopt AI, trust is central. So I'll let you speak to that, Minister, in just a second. You also mentioned Mark Dobbin. And even though we're all talking about places and communities and all the things, sometimes there are special people in a place. And I want to give Adam a chance here, because I feel like a lot of the ecosystem, when I kind of follow its genealogy back, whether it's Verafin that was acquired by the NASDAQ for about $3 billion, or all that often the roots lead back to Mark Dobbin. So if you could just say a couple of words, Adam, about the role of a person like that in a community to create an ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, we've been like incredibly fortunate. We were very small, straight out of university. The first day I met Killick, they'll always tell you the story. I was wearing a like full-blown suit with a tie, heading to my graduation for university. Like I literally, yes, me and Minister Solomon had the same outfit on, and they were like, "Why are you so dressed up for this first investor meeting?" And I was like, "Well, I'm graduating in 1 hour." But like Killick and Polaris, for example, early days, plus some of our angels, I mean, they saw something in us before we did. And we had just graduated university. We had done very well in the Hyperloop competition globally. And that kind of gave us enough to go after it. But we didn't know what we were doing at that stage. And they took a bet. And it was Mark and Joe and Chris and this team. And interestingly, like that was the first part. But then it was the founders. So there was companies like Misa and Heyorka at the time. Then came along Spellbook shortly after. Breeze. We all became really close. And when you look at it in St. John's right now, you've had Verafin, arguably one of the most successful tech companies in North America. They literally are driving like anti-money laundering, fraud detection, human trafficking detection all across the continent for everybody. And then you have CoLab, Spellbook, and then a bunch of others that are chasing down, becoming unicorns here in St. John's. It's an incredible thing to see how small it is, right? You talk about Bannerman as a reference point. Bannerman is a incredible place that I hold so dearly to be home. But it is true. You walk in and people offer to help you and you don't know why. And that's what's special. But I don't know why Mark does this, honestly. Mark and I are more friends at this point and spend time hiking, but I couldn't tell you why. I actually don't think it's about money. I don't think it's about recognition. There's just something in the water. I think it's a Canadian value, but like Newfoundland is an extremely deep one. Minister Solomon was talking about how long would it take to get someone to invite you into your home. I kid you not. We had a customer here from one of the biggest automakers on the planet. They walked around Signal Hill. On the back side of the hill, this customer's wife thought it was a store, opened the front door to their house, walked in, and they were making lunch, and this person invited them in for lunch. This is the type of stuff that happens here.
Okay, for our audience, for our listeners who don't believe this is true, this is the place where that musical "Come From Away," like this is the place, that's Gander, which is down the road, but it is effectively, this is the same place. So, and Adam, just to set up the minister, his job is to care about Canada overall, not any particular company, not an investor. His job is to focus on what does this do for the country. A lot of people are scared that AI is automating things and taking away jobs. Your company is an example of building a framework that will enhance engineering design and create jobs and create better products. And can you just sort of set him up for how does what you're doing benefit people at large, not just CoLab shareholders?
Yeah, I think even just the product we're building, right? It's all about accelerating the pace of innovation. It will change what some of that looks like, but the world needs this, right? Whether it's around climate or it's around some kind of new technology that we want to build, medical devices to save lives, it's just creating new things and new opportunities. I think you've seen that if you go back in history, it always has just created more. It changes things, of course. When I think about it across Canada, though, I think the most important part that Minister Solomon said was giving people the belief they can do this. Like we're from St. John's. It's a small place. It's very easy to have imposter syndrome here. When you realize it's possible, like a Verafin, it gives you the confidence to do it. When you see that 10 times across Canada, it gives you the confidence to do it. And the hardest part is in Canada, we're a little too nice sometimes about taking what we deserve and what we're able to go get, and we don't start. That's the reality. That's the difference. And when you think of Silicon Valley, one thing they don't care about is they'll do anything. And that's a really incredible attribute for the risk taking that sometimes we sit back on here. I think hearing 10, 20, 30 stories like this all across the country, whether it's AI or non-AI, gives people the confidence to go after it. Like I can tell you there's a student design hub here in St. John's where we mentor student teams building projects similar to where we came from. The first thing I said to them was like, you will be the next set of entrepreneurs here. Like you are the smartest group of people here. The next day, one of the kids was in my office here at CoLab pitching me his idea. And I literally thought when he left, I should invest in this company. And he hasn't got a name for it yet. So like that's the type of stuff that can happen once you believe it's possible.
Let me invite the minister to react to any of the things he's heard here.
Well, first, I just want to say that Adam has tie shamed me, and because I'm wearing my tie, so I'm just going to a graduation after. No, it is true though. In politics, you wear a tie, and every time you're talking to founders, and no one's wearing a tie. Look, there's so much there. Let me just start with what Mark's. Mark got the bug when he went out to St. John's, like every single person. I mean, I've been out there so many times. My friend Michael Winter, who's a great writer there, I remember more than 20 years ago hunting moose. And now I'm going to test Adam in Area 7. Where's Area 7? That's right.
I'm going to fail that test.
That's right. So hunting moose in Area 7 and walking through days of Tuckamore. For those of you who are not from Newfoundland, Tuckamore are gnarly routes that you have to walk through. A good metaphor for startups. Once you hack your way through the Tuckamore of startups, you start setting sail like CoLab and Verafin and like there's a lot of great companies there. But the truth is, we got to first of all explore our own assets, and Canada has all the ingredients of an AI superpower. We've got education, we've got the talent, we've got the energy. And there is a global hunt for molecules right now to power compute. But the lowest hanging fruit is Canadian talent and innovation, because you're in a country that has more free trade agreements than any other country in the world. There's a country that's forward leaning on innovation, especially on this. The godfathers of AI are here for a reason. And Ajay, I put you in this constellation, the most forward thinking people about AI who have been there for the longest time. We've got talented companies that the world hasn't yet, discovered. So, this is like drilling for oil, but this is not a fracking situation. It is right there at the surface. So it's, it really is, there's great talent here. Also there's trustworthy relationships. And I'm not just talking about Bannerman's Coffee where people are kind and they're there. And by the way, Newfoundland, Labrador and St. John's has it. I tell you, you're going to walk into a place in Montreal or Quebec City. By the way, Quebec City's got a great ecosystem. You're going to walk in Saskatchewan. I met with Wab Kinew, the premier of Manitoba, and you will not believe what his province has going on in their universities. So it is everywhere. And each culture is welcoming and ready to do business on a handshake, in an environment that is business friendly with all the assets.
Now, Minister, let me ask you about that, because I'm traveling around the world and every country is saying the same thing. Every country is saying that they've got great universities. Every country is leaning hard into AI. Every country is putting significant wood behind the ball in their budgets in terms of so in terms of, if you were to say, here's what I think is our greatest risk as a nation. Our greatest risk. And the thing that is, driving you from the fear side. Many things are driving from the opportunity side, but from the fear side, what do you view as our greatest risk as a nation?
Well, first of all, it's not great to strategize out of fear. Like it's really. I just want to. I mean, I'm not trying to duck the question.
That's fine.
But fear creates bad strategy. Okay. When you're strategizing and building out of fear, when you got your eye over your shoulder, when you're trying, you can't win a race that way. I like sports. You don't run your race looking over your shoulder. You plan the plan, and then you dive the plan. Now, of course, like any military person, your plan may not survive first contact and you have to adjust. But first and foremost, you're building a strategy based on your own competitive advantages, okay? Not out of fear. Second of all, I just want to quickly return to trust. And Mark said it, and you said it. Trust matters. And if you want to succeed, you got to make sure that people trust what you're doing. And AI is new. This is the kind of podcast that we're talking to people who understand and appreciate this because they've been in this world. But, and I've said this a lot, but it merits a repetition. Technology moves at the speed of innovation. Adoption moves at the speed of trust. If we want small, medium-sized companies, if we want populations to trust this on jobs, trust this on kids, trust this on safety, when they see the deep fakes, when they trust it on the mental health side, on the security side, on their privacy, on their data side, we've got to make sure that we're open and honest about that. And that takes time. Right? I will say this, just let's go back to this metaphor of St. John's. You're going to be invited to dinner in 5 minutes in St. John's. But that doesn't mean they trust. Kindness and trust are different, right? You got to, I'll tell you something about the people in St. John's or across Canada. We are the kindest people, but in a fight, the gloves will drop. And if we are tough. Every single Canadian, me included, has a tooth that's half knocked out from a hockey fight or a puck or a scar. We don't mind it. And trust is earned. Like, let's be clear. And in our business of AI, we got to earn that trust. And what does that mean? We got to be transparent about privacy and data. We've got legislation about that. That's part of what Ajay is doing on the task force. Okay. We got to be really open and transparent when we talk about jobs. And so let me just drill down, Ajay, and I'll get to the question, but you ask Adam about jobs. One of the things economists do extremely well is they predict job displacement because you're working with metrics and data points that previously exist. Is this job still going to be there? What economists do poorly is predict what jobs will be created. If that was easy, there'd be 10,000 people like Mark because they would know what's being created. There would be more entrepreneurs. But the age of the entrepreneur is someone that says, this doesn't exist. And the world doesn't think they need it, but I can do it. And it's very hard to predict 5 years ago, could you predict that Shopify would be more valuable than RBC? Could you predict that CoLab? Could you predict that Verafin is going to, it is hard to predict. 20 years ago, if you asked the smartest economists in the world and you said the biggest, most valuable companies in the world are not going to be oil and gas companies and car companies, they're going to be things called NVIDIA and Google. They don't know that because they don't know what's coming. So it's really important when we say, and we use buzzwords like, oh, this is going to create an ecosystem. People don't know what the hell that means. Let's talk real. That means jobs. That means people are going to get paychecks. That means people are going to stay in St. John's and be able to go to their coffee shop because there is a coffee shop. And then let's talk one more level down. They're young. People concerned about young people's job. This is the renaissance of tools drifting into the hands of young people to shorten the distance between idea and investor. That's what Adam's story is. This is Ajay. Remember, Ajay is a unicorn. For hundreds of years, professors, academics stayed in their lane and they were pure frontier researchers. That matters. But the distance between the professor and the CEO has gone from a long circuitous journey to the shortest journey possible. We have met CEOs who are still teaching at universities because they're professors who said, gosh, I can become a CEO. I could take my research. These are revolutionary time cycles and opportunities. And that happens because they trust it. They recognize that they're creating jobs for young people and new ecosystems. So we have to try to understand how that's created, what kind of jobs, where they're coming from. So the thing to finally answer your question, Ajay, to circle back, which is what worries me. What worries me is that in not understanding the job creating possibilities of AI, because it's difficult, we will assume that we will over-index on displacement and under-index on opportunity. Because it's harder to predict numerically what's the job multiplier effect of access to compute. And those are numbers that are tricky. How do I predict the next 200 atoms? It's really hard. Mark's in that business for 20 years and he finds it hard. Like it's a full-time job. In my job as government, I have to say, let's create policies that build on the foundation of trust in order to maximize the number of opportunities so people can imagine new ideas that are new jobs and beneficial services in healthcare, in engineering, to build new companies. That's the opportunity. And I just worry that there are people like, oh, there's too competitive. How can we compete? The Adam thing. Or I only see the negative side because I have easily accessible data points. Like we've got to start, last metaphor, Signal Hill, where Adam is. This is like, remember Signal Hill, folks, this is where Marconi was. This happens to be the rock of innovation where the first transatlantic communication happened, right? This is the place that the global village was literally launched on the rock. And that's the rock that we got to build this foundation. But I tell you, it was hard to see when Marconi did that, what was going to happen, what jobs. That's the moment we're at right now.
Amen. Well, speaking of trust, I don't want to lose the trust of Peter, your chief of communications, because I promised him that you'd be done with us. But that's a great note to end on. And so thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Adam, and my colleague, Mark. We really appreciate everybody taking the time. And Minister, I know how hectic your schedule is right now with Parliament firing back up. And so very much appreciating you taking the time to speak with us.
Ajay, thank you. And thanks again, I just want to appreciate Ajay's on our task force. And I know Mark and Adam, we'd appreciate your thoughts. Anyone listening, there's also a public way to engage on that on our website. I hope that's true. I'm about to meet actually with another series, another great Canadian university who are engaged in this. But I just want to thank the three of you. Adam, just keep kicking ass. Maybe I'm not allowed to say that. Fantastic work. And Mark, the work you're doing, really, really important and changing not just people's lives and companies, but how we think about it. And I've looked for Ajay for a lot of counsel, and I am looking forward to your contribution to the task force. So thanks to all three of you. Just fantastic work.
Great work. Thanks, everybody. And that's it for our show today. Thanks to CoLab's Adam Keating, my colleague, Mark Shulgan, and Canada's Minister of Artificial Intelligence, Evan Solomon, for participating in our special episode. We've also posted links to our hosts and guests' social media feeds and web pages in the show notes, as well as our podcast webpage located online at insights.intrepidgp.com/podcast. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
The views, opinions, and information expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Intrepid Growth Partners. This content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as financial, investment, or legal advice.